Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our September 9th, 2025 LibsWork meeting. This is our first meeting after our summer break. So welcome back to those of you who have been with us before, and welcome for the first time to anybody who is just joining us. My name is Andrea Lewandowski. I am with the Adult Services Specialist at the New Jersey State Library. And LibsWork is an informal networking and collaboration group, a learning group, where we talk about workforce development topics and everything related. So things from digital literacy to adult education, AI, job seeker assistance, social work, I guess everything in between, anything that kind of touches on those areas and that our group is interested in. We meet on the second Tuesday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So you can do that mental calculation if you're not in Eastern Time. We will be moving our November meeting this month because this year because it falls on Veterans Day. So stay tuned for that announcement of the new date. But if you have any questions, if you have suggestions, if you have speaker ideas, you can feel free to reach out. I'll make sure to put my email address in the chat. And if you are already signed up for the LibsWork listserv, then you should be getting notifications about our upcoming meetings and topics. Our next meeting will be in October. And we will have a speaker from Kentucky, the Job Fair Playbook, your guide to a successful high school event, which will be talking about job fairs for students. So I will share that information around. But today we are very fortunate to have Amanda Bergson-Shilcock here from the National Skills Coalition. And we're going to be talking about from the ground level to the big picture, what librarians need to know about the latest developments in workforce development and digital skills. So before I turn it over to Amanda, since we're a larger group, we don't have enough time to do round robin, which we are sometimes able to do and give introductions and where we're from and what we're working on. So if you wouldn't mind putting that into the chat, you can share your name, your title, your library. And then if you have anything that you'd like to talk about, a burning question that you would like to ask the group, or just a general update about what you're working on as it relates to workforce development or all those many, many related topics, you can go ahead and put it in the chat. And Amanda, are you happy to use the chat during the presentation for any questions that come in? Okay.
Totally.
I think Amanda is a Zoom pro. So however you would like to communicate or share or ask questions, you can feel free to do so. So with all of that said, Amanda, I'll turn it over to you to discuss this topic more. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrea, and hello, LibsWork. Lovely to see all of you, and thank you for continuing to put one foot in front of the other in this absolutely tumultuous landscape that we are all trying to live in. We have about 45 minutes for this part of the agenda. I'm going to take about 20 minutes to walk you through some slides. I know you're all going to ask, are you going to get the slides afterwards? Yes, you're definitely going to get the slides afterwards. So no worries on that front. And then we're going to have a good 20 plus minutes for conversation. So feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go if you want, but also know that we are going to have a good 20 minutes of time for conversation, not just for you to ask questions of me, but for you to share things that you all may be doing, because I know there's a lot of expertise in the room here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides, and many of you may know me already, but just in case you don't, I work now for a nonprofit called National Skills Coalition. We are a big tent bipartisan coalition of workforce and education advocates. But in 1990, when I was 14 years old, I started working at my local public library. And for the last 35 years, I have continued to work in public libraries, although not usually as my day job. I currently work 2 Sundays a month as a reference library assistant, but I've worked in processing, cataloging, children's circulation reference, you name it, in a public library, I've probably done it. So libraries are very close to my heart, and I'm especially delighted to be talking with all of you today. So this is, again, a little bit about National Skills Coalition as an organization, in case you're not already familiar with us. What we're going to do today, I'm going to give you some very big picture updates of things that are happening at the federal level. Then we're going to go down to the ground level perspective and talk about the library users or patrons that you're serving. And then I'm going to give you a sneak peek at something that's not out yet, which is new research coming from National Skills Coalition that I think and hope will be helpful to you in your work. So I always like to say that both the bird's eye view and the caterpillar's eye view are equally important. And I'm going to try to epitomize that today by starting with some of the big picture perspective with regard to federal policy and then getting to ground level in terms of serving our patrons. So, where do things stand with federal funding? I'm putting this information here so you can refer back to it, but basically, Congress passed a funding bill back in March that covered the rest of this federal year, which goes through September 30th. That's pretty standard. Congress often passes funding packages in bits and pieces these days. They don't always pass a full year spending bill. What's not common is that there have been changes to already approved federal grants and contracts. And some of you are living this, and so this is not new news to you. And we're going to talk a little bit about how this played out for adult education with regard to the funding for GED and high school equivalency classes and English language classes for adults. But it's also the case that the headlines you see in the news about federal employees getting laid off really also have kind of logistical implications. There just aren't enough human beings to handle the paperwork that getting federal grant payments out the door requires. So even where the administration hasn't cut funding or tried to hold it back, sometimes funding is delayed just because there aren't enough people to handle that processing. And that is, I think, an underreported challenge that a lot of folks are navigating. I should say, too, that I'm not trying to talk today about what's happening with IMLS. That's a really important issue. You have the terrific expertise of the folks at ALA. I know Lara Clark is on this call and others who are monitoring every step of the issue with IMLS. I'm not trying to cover that today. The budget reconciliation bill that Congress passed in early July is going to have massive ripple effects for library users across the country, particularly for low-income library users who are on Medicaid, SNAP, or TANF. And I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. Congress is usually like a college student that writes its paper the day before it's due. I don't think they have time to write this paper, that is the coming year's budget, before it's due on September 30th. So we are looking at one of two outcomes, either a government shutdown or a short-term continuing resolution. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not going to try to predict to you which one of those two things it will be. But in order to pass a fiscal year 2026 budget for the year that begins October 1st, Congress has to essentially pass 12 separate spending bills, and they just aren't close enough to getting all those different bills through the various committees on the House and the Senate side for that to happen. So I don't think they're going to be able to pull a rabbit out of a hat here. So we're going to see either a CR or a government shutdown. The one slightly confusing thing that I do want to flag for those of you who have some pass-through federal funding, depending on how your state handles it or which kind of federal funding you're getting, sometimes that money is forward funded. In other words, money that the federal government allocated in 2025 is money that you're spending in the 2026 year. And that's complicated by the fact that the federal fiscal year starts on October 1st and runs through September, and the state fiscal year starts on July 1st and runs through June. I know this is wonky and in the weeds. I'm going to move off of this in a minute, but I wanted to give all of you this kind of big picture context. So let's talk first about the $700 million in adult education funding that goes out to community colleges and nonprofit organizations and others that provide adult basic education, adult secondary education, meaning GED and high school equivalency, and adult English language learning. As I said, the president tried to delay the funding for this fiscal year, but there was a lot of advocacy from adult education leaders, and eventually that money got released. The president's budget has proposed to completely zero out this money for next year, and the House is going along with that. The Senate, instead of zeroing out the funding, wants to maintain them at current levels. So they are very far apart. They are $700+ million apart. Because the Senate actually wants to include a small cost of living type increase. So it's actually almost $800 million apart. So again, that has implications if any of your libraries are partnering with nonprofits that host ESL classes at your library, if any of your libraries are providing integrated education and training programs that combine job training with adult ed. Those agencies may have been dealing with cash flow issues because of all this back and forth. On the workforce side, the president is proposing to consolidate a whole bunch of federal spending on workforce programs. And the rhetoric you'll hear from him and from some Republicans on Capitol Hill is there's too many different types of workforce programs and we should have fewer programs and they should be consolidated. The Democrats' answer to this is, well, you say you want to consolidate, but actually you want to block, grant, and cut. And also, there's a reason there's different programs, because a program that's good at serving veterans is not always a program that's good at serving youth, which is not always a program that's good at serving folks with disabilities. And so there's a reason that there are different programs. Unclear what's going to happen with this proposal, given that Congress can't even get a basic funding bill through. The administration has also made a bunch of high-profile AI announcements, but almost none of those had any binding force of law attached to them. They're really just kind of memos. Think of them as an email that your grandparent forwarded to you that's like, okay, here's what I'm thinking on this topic. There's really no force of law behind most of them, and there's no money to implement the kinds of things that are being discussed. So we can talk more about that a little bit later when we talk about AI. On the digital equity side, the president canceled the entire $2.7 billion Digital Equity Act program. I think there's a pretty good case if the people who are going to receive grant funding wanted to litigate that, because that is money that Congress appropriated and authorized, and the president ought not to have the power to cancel it under our Constitution. But I'm not sure if that litigation is actually going to move forward. And then on the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, or BEAD program, the funding is delayed, but it is still coming to states, hopefully by January. It's not clear whether funding directly related to workforce and digital skills will still be available. And again, we can talk more about that. So given all of the uncertainties that I just ran through, what are a few things that we can say for sure? We can say for sure that internet continues to be crucially important for businesses, for workers, for students. And you know this because you probably have patrons coming into your libraries regularly, specifically because they know that you're going to have high-speed internet access. Automation keeps expanding. So all the news headlines are about AI, but the reality is that the jobs that have been most affected are actually because of other types of automation, and I'm happy to chat more about that. Generative AI is still really early in its developmental process, and I have this slide here because it's a little funny, but it's also really important to remember that a lot of the headlines you see in the news about AI and job skills or the impact on the labor market are either press releases from somebody with a product to sell or announcements from someone whose company is trying to get venture capital funding for their next round of activities. So you have to take them with a critical eye, and we'll talk more about that. In this landscape, libraries remain absolutely crucial connection points for skill building of all kinds. So let's get down to the ground level. From the caterpillar's perspective, right? We're right here on the leaf with the little droplet of water. One thing you can do if your library does host adult education classes or refer out for them is to check in with the nonprofits or the other organizations in your community that offer those classes to understand how recent funding changes have affected them. There is also non-binding guidance that came out this summer that implied that adult education programs would need to start checking immigration status. This guidance did not have the weight of law behind it. It was very clearly labeled as non-binding guidance, but it has confused a lot of people and kind of thrown a lot of programs into a tizzy of wondering whether they can continue serving the immigrant participants that they used to serve. So happy to chat more about that in the Q&A if any of you are seeing or hearing that from your adult education partners. There is some recent from last December and very worrying data on adult literacy levels in the United States. It really illustrates that since the pandemic, there has been a noticeable drop in literacy skills, and that 16 to 24-year-olds are some of the most affected. I'll send you the link to the full data set when I send you these slides. But from a library perspective, the reason this matters is it gives you a good soundbite to illustrate the importance of whatever library classes or services you may be offering to help people build their literacy and numeracy skills. This is not something that the calendar is going to take care of, right? A lot of folks say, oh, this is about folks who are aging out of the workforce, and when they retire, it's not going to be as big an issue. No, the issue is just as bad, if not worse, for 16 to 24-year-olds. So we're not going to solve this problem with the retirement calendar. We also know that particularly for those of us who are working at the front desk and serving library users who come with specific questions, that digital skills and digital navigation are really, really important. And they're about to become even more important for two reasons. First, the big bill that passed this summer includes new work requirements for millions of people. Most of those people are going to have to upload documents to their state Department of Human Services or Welfare Office to prove that they are working 80 hours a month to meet the work requirement or attending 80 hours a month of educational classes. A lot of those people will not have previously used their phone or signed in on a portal of a government website to upload documents before. So I'm anticipating that libraries will see an uptick of users who are trying to navigate this process. Some of you may have seen in news headlines a few years ago when Arkansas tried to implement a work requirement. One of the biggest issues was that their website would only accept documents during certain hours, which is a bizarre requirement given that the web is available 24/7. But that's an example of the ways in which sometimes states can make it easier or harder for people to navigate this process. And then the loss of the $2.75 billion in Digital Equity Act funding means that a lot of nonprofits that used to provide digital inclusion services are less able to do that. And so there will be more need for libraries to step in to the breach. Some of you may have seen the research we did a few years ago where we looked at 43 million help wanted ads showing the overwhelming demand for digital skills. If you want to dig deeper, this research includes some good charts and graphs that you can use in your own library fundraising or to help talk to your own board of directors about why this work is important and how you can advocate for a bit more funding for it. I'm happy also to chat about this if folks want to. We also know from some great research from Dr. Amy Gonzalez at the University of California in Santa Barbara, there is enormous importance of large screen digital devices. So that means Phones are important, and phones are something that almost everybody has, but having access to a laptop or desktop computer is really, really valuable. And so this gets to questions of, if your library has a laptop lending program, are you promoting that to the kinds of people who might most benefit from it? Are you taking the research from Dr. Gonzalez and using it to make the case to your library board or your state library association or your other funders that investing in, being able to lend people Wi-Fi hotspots to use at home with their laptops, or to have more public use internet terminals at your library, or have more tech support available so that people who have that expertise can be on your library staff, and that is not falling on the weight of library staff who have a great deal of other responsibilities on their plate. We also, know, and I just talked about, the role of libraries in terms of increasing access to laptop and desktop computers. As I mentioned before, there are a lot of AI claims happening, right? And there's a lot of people saying, you should get an AI certificate from Coursera or from, LinkedIn Learning, and that should make you more marketable. There's not usually a good cause and effect link when people make statements like that. In general, my rule of thumb for understanding an AI statement is the more specific and granular it is, the more likely it is to be true. The more large and generic it is, the harder it is to check, and therefore the more I'm inclined to think it's marketing puffery, right? So when people say 30% of jobs are going to disappear in the next 5 years because of AI, that's a pretty big claim. If somebody says to you, it turns out that doctor's office receptionists are doing a lot less scheduling of appointments now because a lot of doctor's offices are using this AI chatbot, and so receptionists need to have other skills. Okay, that's a little bit more checkable, right? That's a little bit more verifiable. It's a little bit more specific. So in general, the more specific the AI claim, the more likely it is, in my experience, to at least be checkable, and hopefully to be actionable for you as librarians who are trying to design programs for your patrons and your library users, or think about kind of cobbling together different services with your partner organizations. So the last thing I'm going to talk about before we open it up for everyone to chat together is giving you a sneak peek at two pieces of research that will be out from National Skills Coalition in about the next 6 weeks or so. The first one is a set of interviews that we did with small and mid-sized businesses. We focused mostly on the manufacturing and construction industries, and we talked to them about what kind of skills they're looking for when they hire entry-level workers, and how they know whether people have those skills. Do they care about credentials? Do they care about particular training programs that they trust? And so our report will be out, as I said, in about the next 6 weeks. But one of our findings is that about 20% of the employers we talk to are kind of employers of choice, and they are following a series of best practices. And one of those best practices is to be really clear with themselves about what kind of skills they're looking for, and to give workers a clear career pathway so that if you get hired for an entry-level role, you know what you need to do to get promoted, and you know what kind of skills you have to have in order to move up to the next level job. We also found repeatedly that employers told us they valued soft skills. And when we dug into that, there were some employers that were kind of not very reflective and not very thoughtful. And what they meant by soft skills was really kind of compliance or obedience oriented skills. And they would mention things that were often racialized or otherwise problematic, right? I need people to cover up their tattoos and pull up their pants and come to work on time. But there was a subset of employers who were really thoughtful in defining soft skills as interpersonal skills: teamwork, communication, problem solving. And they talked about how that is actionable on the job, right? We interviewed one guy who ran a manufacturing company in Mississippi, and he said, listen, we are a lean manufacturing company. We follow the quality assurance and improvement process that says our workers have to be comfortable speaking up to tell us how they'd better like to organize their workflow or what we could do differently to improve efficiencies. That can't happen if they don't trust and feel comfortable speaking up in the work environment. So when you're thinking about what kind of classes or support your library can offer, wondering if there might be somebody available to teach interpersonal skills is way more useful than the other type of soft skills that unfortunately is often more common in conversations on this topic. We also heard that employers prioritize digital skills that are learned in a real world context. This is probably a no-brainer. Most of you probably know this, but hopefully it affirms things that you would have already thought. And then finally, we did a second study where we talked to about 35 workers themselves who had enrolled in some kind of short-term job training program. Maybe they were training to be a medical assistant or a phlebotomist or an x-ray tech. Maybe they were training to be a digital marketing coordinator or an IT help desk specialist. Whatever it was, they tried to find training programs that were free or easy to schedule, virtual, flexible scheduling, and would lead them to a job. The problem is that there's a really messy information environment right now. There are some outright scams out there. There are bad actors that are trying to trick people into training programs. And then there's plenty of training programs that mean well, but aren't actually connected to jobs. And so helping people be able to critically assess, oh, I saw this ad on Facebook for this job training program. What are the questions I should be asking about whether this is actually going to help me get a job? Is really, really important. And I know some of you have worked on topics like information literacy and credibility literacy, and this is kind of a cousin of credibility literacy. So that research is also coming soon. And now I'm going to pause and give an opportunity for folks to either ask questions or, as I said, feel free to share your own experience and expertise. I know I'm definitely not the only person here who's thinking about and working on these issues. Again, you're going to get the slides. They will have all of the URLs for all of the studies and the research that I mentioned. I'm also fully available after today's conversation if you just want to follow up to say, hey, I'm making a presentation to our board, or hey, we're writing an op-ed for our local newspaper. Can you give me a citation for this information that I want to be able to highlight? All right, let's pause. I'd love to hear questions or reflections, or feel free to brag and tell me about cool stuff that your library is doing.
And you can feel free to just unmute yourself or use the chat.
And I see Carrie's question there about the new research on large screens. I am going to include that in the slides, but I'm also going to drop it in the chat right now so that you have it. The researcher is Dr. Amy Gonzalez at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and she's just terrific.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That is awesome. Having somebody else do the research and share it is good for us. One time.
All right, let's see here. Okay, so the page I'm linking to gives you both an hour-long webinar with Dr. Gonzalez, but then also a link to the research itself on the same page. So I've just dropped that in there. Glad it was helpful, Leah and Andrea. Other reflections or things that folks want to add that you're seeing in your library at this moment, or that you're worried about on behalf of your library users or patrons at this moment?
I one thing that does come to mind, and it's probably just because I just watched a technology webinar on it, is really the information literacy as far as AI and just how that is going to be impacting like how people search and go about finding work and utilizing it, but in a good or helpful way.
Yeah, it's a really tricky issue, right? There are things that can be very helpful, there are things that can be very problematic, and it can be hard to sift through which is which. Right now, there's a bit of an arms race happening with regard to job applications, in that a lot of employers are using AI to evaluate people's job applications, sometimes in ways that the algorithm may uh, kind of ignore some people's applications in ways that could be really problematic, right? Like imagine if the algorithm decides to strip out anybody who had more than a 6-month employment gap on their resume, that could differentially impact workers with disabilities or workers who might have recently had a pregnancy and been out of the workforce for a bit. Um, on the other hand, sometimes using AI tools can help employers think more holistically about skills and not just focus on, does this person have exactly this degree with exactly this name of a degree, but has these other kind of skill that they might have learned in a different context but are just as valuable. On the user side or the job seeker side, lots of people are using generative AI tools to write cover letters or to prepare job application materials, depending on the kind of job they're applying for and whether writing is a part of that job. That could be either really problematic or really efficient, right? Um, and folks are also, exploring other kinds of AI-driven career exploration tools. I was part of a judging panel for the U.S. Department of Education's Future Finder contest a few years ago, and there were two interesting software packages that won that contest, and Gladio is one of them. I'm going to drop the link into the chat. I went into this quite skeptical about the idea that software would be a helpful tool for analyzing these questions, and I came out thinking that in the right hands it could be genuinely helpful. So let me see if I can pull up the link for Gladio's Future Finder prize. Here we go. Yeah, so this is a press release from midway through the contest before they actually won, but I think it gives you a nice overview of their product and how it works. I'm not endorsing them. I don't have any arrangement with them. The second place is called Work Bay. They also have an interesting software package, and all of these things are just tools that can't substitute for human expertise. They are ancillary to human expertise. Other questions or reflections that folks have? I'm very curious to see if and how any of these things are showing up in your libraries yet, or if they haven't trickled down yet. And maybe the answer is everyone's just trying to keep their head above water, which, very, very understandable, very relatable. Andrea, are there particular things you wanted to make sure that we lifted up in this? I see Leah's comment in the chat of definitely seeing a skills gap for patrons in digital skills. Leah, if you want to either unmute or elaborate a little bit in chat, I'd be curious about how that's showing up. Is it that folks need more help when they're at the public internet terminals, or they're bringing their laptops to the desk looking for troubleshooting help, or they come with their smartphones and they're like, help, I can't apply for a job. What am I doing?
Yeah, it's really a mix. So I'm in the Charlotte metro area. My library is one of our community branches, so it's smaller. And so like for like circulation size, we're doing like 10 to 12,000 a month. So but when we're on the desk, I feel like the majority of my time on the desk is tech help. I joke that this job is more Geek Squad than it is a lot of other things when I'm not doing programming. And I think like it ranges everything from like just how to like attach something to an email to like uploading documents to typing skills. I feel like are really getting left behind. And I'm seeing it in trends of older adults, but also in the upcoming like teens, which is really interesting. Um, and seeing that too with like flash drives and stuff too, different like tech things that I wasn't anticipating would like get left out. But yeah, just a general people feeling left behind, feeling embarrassed, and then, but they're like, well, I have to pay someone if I want to get any help with this. And so, yeah.
Interesting. That is a really interesting point. Yeah, it is. I'm seeing Chris's point in the chat. Yeah, I mean things like even just file folder storage and maintenance. Like if people are doing everything on their phones, file folder structures and typing on a keyboard are just not, yeah. And Lisa, I'm seeing your point about the importance of large screens. Many of the recruitment and hiring platforms are not mobile friendly. That is so true, right? And so patrons come in needing access to a computer or a laptop, and then, of course, they need help with the operating system. Yeah, that really rings true. Um, yeah. Yeah, it's as a Gen Xer, I do feel like I can read cursive, I can write cursive, I can touch type. I did not think these were antique skills, but apparently they are. Um, yeah.
Yep. One thing that I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on this, but when we start getting into that area of helping with these computer skills, that it crosses over into handling um, personally identifiable information, social
Totally.
security cards, all of those things. And I wonder how libraries are handling that and advising reference staff members on what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate, and when is it an opportunity to refer somebody to another resource, or but sometimes those places are sending people to the library. Like we've heard stories about motor vehicles sending people to the library to fill out forms, and because they don't have time. So I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on that, about some of this information that library staff are being able to handle because of the digital skills gap.
I mean, I definitely see libraries being constantly seen as the resource of last resort. Lots of people refer to libraries and nobody wants to resource libraries to fill those needs. I'm seeing a couple of things in the chat here. I see Chris's comment about the kind of tech help cycle that you get into with patrons, which I've definitely experienced, right? They come in, they need to do a thing, but in order to do the thing, they need an email account. They don't have an email account, or if they did, their granddaughter created it months ago and they don't have the password, and they can't do two-factor authentication because they no longer have that phone anymore. So then you need to create a new email, and then they don't have a phone right now, or their phone is out of minutes, or, and it just goes through this whole cycle. And then on Mark's point, they said, that the state unemployment insurance system was supposed to be being overhauled, but then that's on hold, which sadly is the case in a couple of different places right now. And so then you have a lot of folks who are trying to access unemployment who might need additional support. And Carrie's flagging the kind of interpersonal skill of being a librarian, and when are you a therapist versus a instructor versus somebody that they are kind of expecting to do the work, right? And this kind of gets back to the old days of the switchover from card catalogs to computerized OPAC catalogs, which was some patrons would come up to you and say, just look it up for me because they felt intimidated. And, that's always a balancing act.
Yeah. Also, and I feel like I end up speaking for the unemployment people, but in certain situations, it's absolutely not. There has got to be some boundaries as far as how much help we can give for those
Sure.
applications in general. Because you hear horror stories about even job center staff being personally sued because they helped someone with unemployment by typing for into the fields for that application, and then unfortunately something went wrong, and the person they helped ended up suing them. So there's now a don't touch anything policy.
I had not heard that before. That is really disturbing. Is that a state policy?
No, I think it's more of a best practice at this point, but just talking with workforce development colleagues, it's kind of scary because you try to do a good thing and then oh, whoops, and who knows what the situation was. But I tell all my member libraries, just stick to just reading the questions. Don't type anything in for anyone.
Mm, interesting. Cassandra's comment in the chat, I think, is really interesting here about intimidation. Hmm. Um, People not attending programs around career and workforce development at the library. I'm curious how other folks who've offered those kinds of services in your library, what have you seen be successful in terms of um, getting folks to actually access the services that you have to support them?
We are such a quiet group today. Maybe someone could write into chat but it would be great if anyone is able to unmute. And even if you're just sharing that you're experiencing a similar issue of lower attendance, it would be great to hear.
I do want to flag something Chris said in the chat, which I think speaks to this question of are people showing up, where people feel like they aren't able to be uncertain or wrong. And it is astonishing to me that people seem to have experienced consequences that make them hesitant to guess or raise their hand or speak up for anything because they think they're going to be made fun of or insulted. And so when I'm doing public workshops, I actually say, when I'm asking for a volunteer from the audience, I actually say, I'm not interested in public humiliation. And people always laugh, but it does get me more volunteers once they know they're not coming up on stage for somebody to, kind of point and laugh at their ignorance. Um, so I think that's a really interesting point about shame and yeah, definitely I don't modeling I don't know seems really important. I also saw a comment from Kristen in the chat about scams, right? So many stories I heard in the recent focus groups we did with workers were about scams they had experienced. Scam text messages, scam job openings, scam like, oh, if you apply for this remote work from home job, we'll send you a check to buy your own laptop with. But then the check, is for too much money. So you should send us back some of the money. And then, of course, the check bounces because it wasn't real to begin with. Just a huge issue. Danielle, I'm seeing a comment in the chat here of Yeah, connecting with the appropriate community resources, right? Libraries can't be all things to all people, but can we make effective referrals? That's really tricky in an environment where a lot of folks are seeing funding cuts. Um, and I see Veronica's great example of the workforce career coach by appointment. I don't know, Veronica, if you want to come off mute and elaborate on that, that'd be great. And if you're not in a position to do that today, that's fine too.
Hi everyone. Just on the little shyer side, but we have a career coach that works. We have an MOU with San Bernardino County, so she is here with us at the library. She's not city employed, but she is a collaboration. But our team works with her to get those appointments in. So people are coming in, especially seeking this type of help, and we, help them get the appointment. But she also helps us with programming throughout the year where she does like workshops and resume building and, interviewing tips. So she kind of creates the relationship with these people, and it's mostly by word of mouth. That's how we get people coming back. And of course, our in-house library program flyers. We also have a magazine that goes out to all of our community members here in Ontario. So we also put those workshops on there. We heavily post on social media and we highlight her as a service. So that kind of gets people interested in coming because yes, I agree. I think people are a little shy, to ask for help, especially adults. But if it's on a one-on-one environment, I think that really helps for them to come and trust that they're just going to be, that there's not going to be people around to hear their situation or whatever it may be. So that has been helping us. But yes, we do have an MOU with our county.
Thanks, Veronica. I think getting the specifics of that example are really, really helpful. I love that you're advertising on social media and that you're making it clear that these are one-on-one appointments so that folks can have that personal sense of who it is that's going to be assisting them. Yeah. Libraries as a meeting place for sure. Yeah. Andrea, I know we're coming close to the end of our time here. Was there anything else you wanted to make sure we covered?
I did just want to bring attention to Leah's comment earlier that also about drop-in services. And so I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that in the chat, whether they're seeing maybe an uptick in drop-in services, even as maybe scheduled programs for a larger group might be declining, or if it's flip-flopped or about staying the same. But then in terms of other subjects, I guess I would just ask one more question of you. There's so many demands on libraries right now, so many demands on staff. Do you have any words of wisdom or just looking at trends that you're seeing? What are some things that you think maybe in the next 6 months or so, libraries should really be keeping an eye on or should really be keeping at front of mind as they're figuring out what services to offer and maybe how to meet some needs in their communities?
So when I think about triaging all of the possible requests you could be responding to and all of the possible rabbits you could be chasing after, I think about asking yourself two questions. Where am I hearing the most urgency from my community? And where am I the most energized to act? Those are two screening questions that can help you sift through. You could be hearing tons of energy in your community about concerns about Medicaid cuts, but you might think, you know what? We're not really set up to help with that. We don't have a lot of energy in that area. This is not something we're going to put our eggs in that basket right now. But you could find that, maybe you have somebody who's really energized by youth work and somebody else who thinks, well, what if we did a youth digital navigator training where we helped youth become able to provide some digital navigation assistance to other library users? That could respond to a need that our community has, but also where the energy of our staff is. So asking yourself those two questions, where is the need of my community most acute right now? And where is the energy of myself or my staff and my colleagues most concentrated? That can help you narrow down that huge range of things you could be doing into a shorter list of things that you really want to be spending your time doing.
I think that's a great way to look at it, especially as, we're all saying that there are so many demands and we have to take care of ourselves as well. The airplane metaphor, you have to put your mask on yourself first. So if you feel good about the work you're doing and energized by it, it makes it much easier to handle those obstacles that get in your way. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay. And I will give everyone, if you have any last questions or comments, there's a nice conversation happening in chat about a program that LaToya ran that was an in-person session on resume building. So if you want to check that out, or LaToya, if you have anything else you want to add about that. Otherwise, I will give a plug for our October 14th session once again. That will be at 2 o'clock Eastern Time on October 14th. The Job Fair Playbook, your guide to a successful high school event. School and public libraries are the perfect place to set up a job fair for students. And Amanda Hurley, who is a library media specialist at Henry Clay High School in Lexington, Kentucky, will be sharing that information. I'll put the link in the chat. Let's see if that go, so that you can register if you haven't already. And please reach out to me if you have any suggestions for topics or speakers we should explore in the future. Also, you're welcome to share the LibsWork meeting schedule and presenters, any of the information through your communication channels. Please share information about this group with anyone who you think would benefit from these sessions. We want to make sure that this is reaching as many people as possible and that we're creating a place where you want to come back from month to month. So with all of that said, Amanda, thank you very, very much for being with us today. This was wonderful. I'll make sure that everyone gets the slides and the recording afterwards.
Awesome.
And yeah, so I guess that's it, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the beautiful weather if you have it. And if not, I hope you have beautiful weather soon.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.